Welcome back to another episode of Realcast. On today's episode, we have a special guest joining us. He's a renowned angler in the mid-north coast area of New South Wales for targeting big snapper in shallow country on lures. He's someone I've watched for quite a few years on social media and taken on many pieces of advice that he has been giving out. His name is ByTheGills Gilchrist, but he's also known in fishing circles as ByTheGills. Please welcome him to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Big round of applause. Woo! So I guess to start with, Sam, can you remember the first time you went fishing? Where was it and who were you with?
Yeah, I have some really early memories of fishing around Soldiers Point with my grandfather, my mum's dad, and even my father's mum and dad chasing garfish and your bread and butter species, your garfish, your leatherjacket, bream whiting, flathead. I guess that at that stage, flathead were a trophy sort of species. They were distinguishable or distinct from the others. I remember sitting around the family table and rolling garies out with a rolling pin or a milk bottle to crush all the bones so we could cook them and eat them. And then a very fond early memory was chasing tailor off the beaches around the Central Coast, like North Entrance Beach and whatever even travelling on trips north to Stockton Beach off Newey and camping on the beach with Dad and my uncles and chasing tailor and salmon. And it's, funnily enough, I'll drive away or run away from a salmon these days, but back then they were a prized catch. And I don't know what the publication was called, but it was in the Central Coast newspaper with a decent salmon off North Entrance Beach, and I was only a little fella, and the old man used to run big glass rods, 12 or 13 foot with he used to love those Mitchell spin reels.
Yeah.
And I was too short to cast into the surf, so he'd sort of cast my little rod out, and I was holding his. He could barely hold the thing, and this salmon's grabbed it, and I remember just holding the rod flat and getting dragged through the sand, and he gave us a hand to land that fish. And the old gang hooks and a brine pilly. There's a lot to say for it. And even these days, I touched on it earlier, but I read an article years ago that Steve Sarling wrote about losing your fishing mojo, and sometimes you've just got to strip everything back and go back to basics. And that's when I'll go down to the beach or off the stones and spin a tailor, knock the fillets off him and cook him up for breakfast, because that's what we used to do when we were kids. And really, I think, grounds you again and gets your rhythm back fishing wise.
Yeah, exactly. Those first memories are something so special. Can you remember the actual first fish you ever caught? Was it a garfish like you were just saying?
I can't remember the first one. I would have been really, really young. I mean, I'm just going to say 3 or thereabouts. I mean, I'm lucky enough now to have 2 boys of our own, and one of them is fanatical little fisherman, Rolly, and I can remember, I'd be able to tell you every fish he's caught, but I can't remember my first. It would have been a garfish or whiting or bream, something like that.
Well, then, as myself as a new dad, I've got a 9.5-month-old as well. Are you mind sharing us your tale with Rolly's first ever fish?
I can. We spent a lot of time pumping nippers around the creeks up this way, and Moonee Creek particularly, and I'd taken he and his brother, and Rolly was still, just walking around in nappies, and we're up at Red Rock and pumped yabbies, and it was an atrocious weekend. It was the first time Mum had gone away, and the boys were in my care, and we're at Red Rock in a howling southerly, raining, and Rolly was catching whiting off the beach and never put his rod down. And I thought, there's something in this kid. that's I've had enough. And he'd catch them and walk around with them in his hand and go and let them go. And that evolved into carrying my lures around, swimming him in the bath, and now he can skip frogs on his bait caster, and he's 9 years old, and he's going to go places if he keeps going the way he's going.
Exactly. Has he outfished you yet?
Yeah, on bass he has a couple of times. He's a very keen bass angler. He loves chasing his bass, and the time he got me, I reckon it was 12:4, but I'd paddled 25 k's in the Macleay River and he hadn't touched an oar once. So he had a bit of an advantage, but we'll give him that one.
Yeah, we'll just give it to them. When you were growing up, I guess similar to myself, was there whether it be a celebrity fisherman or someone you knew that actually had a big influence in you learning to be able to fish?
Yeah, my mum's dad, Harley Abbott was his name. He's a huge part of my fishing journey, and I didn't realise it until probably recent years. He passed when I was 21, so close to 20 years ago. Celebrity wise, Rex Hunt, Bushy, Starlo, those fellas, and the Rex Hunt Fishing Adventures series was, my staple, and that's all we had at the time. You didn't have YouTube wasn't what it was or is today. I'm pretty sure Rex was making something like 50 grand back in those days an episode. That would probably be close to 200 or 250 these days. And they really set the foundation for myself. Like, I used to use Rex Hunt combos, and you used to believe remember they released those invisible hooks they combined or did a partnership with Mustad or something like that. And even when snapper on soft plastics became a thing, the first lures we were using were flathead lures, the squidgy shads or wrigglers and the squidgy jig heads, which snapper just annihilated. But those fellas, and definitely Harley, my grandfather. I still remember coming home from school one day, and he was at our family house, and he's like, "You want to come for a fish?" And I said, "Yeah, where are we going?" He said, "We'll just walk down to the beach from the house." And I'd never fished there before, and kind of thought I'll just go as a nicety and stand with him and have a fish. And we ended up toweling up the whiting that afternoon, and then I fished there every week for years after that, and caught everything from whiting, brim, luderick, mulloway, and I just would never have gone there if it weren't for him. And it's just those little tiny things that make make your journey, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And it's memories to be able to look back on to today, and brings a smile not just to me, but obviously to everyone else. I guess as you have grown up through your fishing career, and as we all get older, you learn some things along the way. What was probably, when you were in your younger years, the most important lesson you learned when you were fishing?
Try as hard as you can to be smart in what you do on the water. You don't get it right every time. But the more you can rely on your experience, and it's like anything in life, time on the water or time spent fishing is just accumulating more and more knowledge and applying that knowledge to each situation. I mean, we used to have, every town's got its OGs, and the lads I looked up to most here were, your Shane Bursels and Jim Hugheses of the world. And there used to be a competition here called the Easter Classic, which doesn't run anymore because it was a slaughter fest back then. It was every species. So the comp started Good Friday at 5 a.m. and didn't finish until I think it was Sunday afternoon, and you just fished hard the whole time. So there were guys that went to sea and didn't come back in. Made for interesting behaviour at the Prezzo after a few beers, that's for sure. But every species was on the list, and the intent was to catch as many species. So it was the team or angler who caught the most species with the greatest accumulated weight won. So you can't do that anymore. But Jim Hughes, one of the lads there, he said to me, 24 hours is a long time in fishing, because the sea can change so much. The ocean doesn't operate by a calendar, doesn't operate by what you think it should be. It does what it wants, and you need to be able to adapt to meet what the ocean is doing and the creatures that live within it. If you try and operate off your agenda, you'll miss out a lot. And at a talk night, we had the Trophy Hunter Snapper Comp was just held on the weekend gone, and we had a talk night the Tuesday prior, and again, a privilege to be able to stand there and share my perspective on snapper with some of the younger crew. There was a lot of kids there asking a lot of great questions, but someone asked, do you have a plan when you go to sea? And the answer is yeah, but I've got about 25 of them based on what I think should happen, but every single one of them could change the minute you get out the harbour and you see what way the current's going, what colour the water is, what the temperature is, what your wind direction is, what your drift's going to be. No, it's not meant to be a pun, but be fluid when you're on the water and lean on your experience to make smart decisions.
Exactly. Not just smart decisions in regards to catching fish, but also smart decisions in regards to safety and stuff like that as well. Moving forwards and looking, I guess, more towards the present time, how has your approach changed from when you first started fishing? So from when you were rolling out garfish and having them for dinner to now?
I'd like to. It was probably a lot simpler back then. Like you still just chase what was in front of you, but a float, a small hook, and a piece of bread, or a little bit of peeled prawn, or a Mr. Twister, if you were getting fancy and chasing a flathead, was as complicated as it got. And now, I've probably got enough outfits to fill 3 or 4 golf bags, and every single one of them has a different purpose, and rod tapers are different. Like, say if you sat 2 of my favorite outfits alongside each other, one for snapper and the other's perfect for barra, one is a much faster taper to wallop the hooks into a barra, and the fight's different, whereas you still hit a snapper just as hard, but you need a more parabolic blank so as to be able to pull on the fish and say pull it away from kelp or structure, but not compromise the integrity of your jig heads. And then we haven't even gotten into the top water space yet. I mean, the difference between stick baiting blanks and the lure sizes that you're using, the species you're chasing, whether it be kings, yellowfin, GTs, or doggies. They're all very, very different. So yeah, I'd hate to know how much gear I've got down there that gets used once or twice a year, but if you don't have it, you can't go.
Exactly.
And even things like how you rig stick baits, and it impacts the swimming action, and you've got to tailor the size of your split rings and your hooks to the conditions at hand and the fish you're chasing. It's a very all-consuming craft these days.
It's a deep rabbit hole compared to, like you said at the start, a float, a hook, a bit of bread, and a bit of bait.
I remember fishing it when we lived at Oberon for a couple of years, chasing trout in the dam and the surrounding streams was some of the most beautiful fishing you could ever do. And sometimes a clear float with a mud eye was just, you were guaranteed to put a mud eye in Oberon Dam, you will catch a quality trout. Nothing complicated about it.
Now we've got live scope, we've got electric motors, specky boats, we've got all of it now. And whether we catch more fish is a question that could be answered for hours and hours on end. Moving on, what's the most challenging trip you've ever been on?
There's been a few. The trip to Vanuatu last year was super hard. But at the same time, you're in your top 1% of the global population to be able to be so lucky to be doing something like that. So it's not as if it's lost on me how incredible that opportunity was. But I actually trained to go because we were jigging and top watering for 10 days straight. Um, I've taken lads fishing and they have 4 casts with a stick bait and go, this is too hard. Let alone casting and jigging and hooking the equivalent of your car up and letting it drive off at 80 k's an hour. The reason that, you're in tight quarters, we lived on the boat for 10 or 12 days. We did a lot of miles at sea. We went to some of the remote atolls and island groups to the north of the main island in Vanuatu. And we caught a lot of doggies, but the challenging part, and anyone I'm by no means an expert in the dogtooth space, but anyone who's chased them or targeted them specifically will, I'm sure, agree that the challenge is psychological. And sharks, you hook a lot of good fish and the majority are eaten by sharks. And that wears really thin on you after a while. You just keep being beaten, not by your equipment and not necessarily by the fish, but by the fish that want to eat this fish. And it tears you apart. And you've when you're jigging so hard and for so long, you're shutting your eyes because your whole body's in proper pain. And then you hook one and it's tearing off, and then a bloody shark eats it. I came back from that trip. I think we took 175 pre-rigged assist hooks. So if you maybe add 50% to that for ones that we tied out there on the boat, we came back with 2 or 3.
Oh my God. That's a lot of terminal tackle lost.
So much. And, the last session, it was only Mike and I left jigging in 300 meters, and he hooked and landed a doggy about 65 kilos, I think, which was the best for the trip. And then I hooked up alongside him and was in the process of being spooled. I don't think I would have been, but I didn't even get a chance. He didn't stop and a shark ate him. So, but we visited and stayed at an island. The weather was kind to us. We stayed at an island that had potentially never been fished, and we top watered some dogtooth that evening that were just truly amazing. So I was so lucky in that regard. And any trip I do with Rolly Boy to go to a completely different end of the spectrum, he's a young fella. His first barra, big barra he caught at Callide, was 1.17 meters.
Jesus.
He trained on the trampoline for months before it, saying, "Dad, can you pretend to be a barra?" And he fought it off the trampoline. And when those trips are challenging as well, because you got to drive 20 hours or 25 hours up and back. You got to do everything yourself because he's doing his best, but he's only a little tacker. But the reward attached to seeing your own son catch the fish of a lifetime and the fish of his dreams is pretty spectacular. And to do it together is something that it's what life's all about, really.
Yeah, exactly. That's getting me very, very excited for the coming years. I cannot wait for my little boy to be old enough to hold his own fishing rod and go out for a fish. But even like you said, that trip to Vanuatu, going to those places where people may have never casted a rod before and never actually been, and you're that one person that gets the opportunity to be able to go and do that that's such a cool thing to be able to even think about as a fisherman.
Oh, it was incredible. And we visited some communities on islands that hadn't seen Westerners for 15 or 20 years and dropped fish to these communities. And it was truly incredible.
Just makes you wonder. Like, I always seem to think back to, my dad grew up in the 60s and 70s and used to tell me what fishing was like when he was a kid and how it has changed over time. And is that what fishing off the east coast of Australia was like, 20, 30 years ago? Or was it similar to what we have now? Or, we'll never know, but that's always that question or that thought that I have.
Oh, mate, I've often had fantasies of taking the 620 and a 100 packets, or probably 1,000 packets of bait junkies and everything I need back in time and launching off coughs, and the snapper fishery would have been incredible. And I think, there's a few people have made the mistake of fishing in some of the green zones or sanctuary zones around here, and I know like a couple of lads in the Dave Irvine Memorial Snapper Classic did it by accident a few years ago. And they caught 50 snapper in a 2-hour session in an afternoon. So that's probably it would have been better than that, because, it would have been untouched in comparison to what it is today. And it's something that we need to do better, is manage our fisheries so that our children have the same chance, if not better, at catching great fish is what we've had.
Exactly. It's like I live in Sydney, so I get a lot of fish with a lot of fish pressure under them, because go out on the weekend and there's hundreds of boats on your spots and stuff like that. And then as soon as I, go for a drive down south or north of Sydney and just see how much easier it is, I guess, to target the same species of fish, and you just like, you can see the difference almost straight away. But moving on, speaking of favorite fishing and stuff like that, do you have a favorite spot that you return to and often? And now I know a lot of fishermen. We're not going to throw out GPS marks right now, and we don't want to start that big right with that sort of stuff. But a general area, we don't have to within 100 k's. Let's just put it like that of a fishing spot where you normally would go to.
I think just coughs, Aaron. Generally, I mean, we're so lucky. You've got that intersection between tropical and subtropical species. The marlin fishery here is excellent. Kingfish fishery could be better, but it's pretty damn good. I actually think it could be like New Zealand, but that's a fishery management discussion. Yeah, mate, coughs for sure. I mean, you can catch trophy snapper within 2 minutes of the harbour. And by trophy, I mean, that 90 centimetre plus, 8 to 12 kilo fish. The most of them have come from within a very short trip of the harbour.
Wow.
So you can't go past this place. I think it's really a special location. It's why there's so much ground up the front. I mean, if you took that 100k either side radius, you'd go down to Smoky Cape in the south at Southwest Rocks and Sand and Evans Head in the north. There's a lot of ground in that area with some very, very special fishing to be had.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I guess the final question in regards to, before we get into a lot of technique specific stuff, you've caught all these fish, and yesterday going through your Instagram handle by the Gills, for anyone that's wanting to have a look at it, there's fish, all types of different fish. It's just a smorgasbord. You see when you go to boat ramps, you've got the sign of all the fish you can catch in New South Wales. There's so many that I guess you would have ticked off. Is there a fish that you have not caught yet that you are really, really wanting to go out and target?
It's a really good question.
Or even let's say you haven't caught a meter, barra or jewfish or something like that. You've caught the actual species, but you haven't reached that trophy size that you want.
There's definitely, definitely the meter snapper. I think I was counting a few months ago because someone asked, and I went through some photos just to see. I think I've got a dozen in the 90s. Pretty lucky in that regard, and the best is 96, so not far off the meter. But I've only heard of a handful of meteries being caught over a 20-year period, so they're there, but they're a bit of a unicorn.
Well, I guess similar to me, my biggest is only 71. So I'm looking to crack 75, and then 80, 85, 90 and so on. But like, even for me, a fish that I haven't caught yet would be like a largemouth bass in America. Just you go onto any YouTube and you type in fishing, and most of the time it's some American angler catching largemouth bass. That just looks like something so cool to do.
Yeah, I mean, you come up here and you should beat your 75 pretty easily. I mean, 80s, 85s are pretty. I don't know. We're a little bit spoiled, and having done it for a long, long time. I mean, an 80-something centimetre fish comes in now, and you sort of go, "Oh, that's a good one," but not too fussed about it. Once they get into the 90s, they're a different animal. They change. They are older and they look older, and they're heavier set. They're just a different creature. The meter 50 plus kingfish is definitely one. And I'd like to, top water. I think my best is around meter 40 thereabouts. But I think if you get into that meter 50 class, if it's a healthy fish, you'd be pushing that 30 to 33, maybe 35 kilos if it's in really good condition. I reckon I've got a few stick baits hung off the northern end of one of the islands here on the Kingfish Trophy wall, and I've seen a few, but you got to be pretty resilient when targeting topwater kings, because they can be a complete pain and don't play the game. But I remember a story of a lad who dived in the Blue Water Classic here years ago, and he dived on a spot which is not one of the islands. It's just a bommy in the middle of nowhere, and he shot a 34 kilo cobia, and he said there was a king next to it that dwarfed it, and he aimed at the king and went nah, and shot the cob, and that's the one that's got to come up and eat a gamma 120 one day. That king has to come up and just inhale it, and I'm going to rip his head off.
And your arms as well. You might need 2 shoulder recos after it.
It'd be worth it.
Oh yeah, 100%. That would be so worth it. I guess so. Moving on to our technique specific. If you haven't, again, gone on to By the Gills on Instagram and have a look at some of the fish that he's caught. There's multiple array of fish, but I guess over the years, he's renowned as one of the better snapper soft plastic fishermen, and especially, in that Coffs Harbour, mid-North Coast area. I've certainly taken a lot of tips off videos and posts that he's put up, and it's certainly improved my fishing personally. And I guess to start with, the first question will be like, what makes soft plastics an effective choice for catching snapper?
They're just dangerously effective, and especially on big fish. I remember the first time I'd even heard about it, I could tell you exactly where I was and what I was doing. I was reading a magazine on the toilet, as you do. And Dave Ray, a lad who used to write for Modern Fishing and hung in the same circles as Rex and Michael Guest, and at the time that who's who were the rec fishing space and that media space, and he wrote an article, Snapper on SP, and I read it and thought, what's this all about? And at that stage, float lining was, and it still is, an art form, and it's a really difficult one to master, probably more so than plasticking, I think. So your float lining snapper was the way we did it. You still caught big ones, but because of the style of fishing, the equipment we used, and you were restricted in terms of your movement because you're at anchor, you definitely needed a bit more luck on your side when you hooked the big ones. When I read that article of Dave's, at the time, brim and those smaller species plastics were unheard of out at sea, really. And I went out with a friend south of Coffs, and we took our. This is how far that aspect of the sport has come. I had a TSS4 Speedmaster.
Yep.
And I filled it with 30-pound fire line.
Yeah.
on an 8 to 10 kilo live fibre. So it was, and I just put 30-pound mono as the leader, tied a jig head on, and he was standing next to me. And we both cast, and he said, "What do you do here?" I was like, "I don't know." And we both had our bail arms open, and he's just gone as a fish grabbed it, and I was like, "Oh shit!" And he goes, clicks it over, and goes on, and that I said, "Well, I guess that's about it." And that day we caught something like 15 snapper and 4 or 5 pearl perch, and locally the old pearly fishers just say deep water, blah blah blah, paternoster rig, catch your pearlies. We were catching them in 16 meters of water, and they were to 3 to 5 kilos, like
Wow.
proper fish. And we've gone in, you're going, what just happened? And no one would believe us. And then for years at the boat ramp, all the cleaning tables, you'd be there with a box of reds, or and people would say, "How did you catch them?" And you'd be like, "On plastics." No, you didn't. And that's all that's in the boat.
Go check my boat. Have a
You
look.
don't. Well, you don't have to believe it if you don't want to. But it's really um, it's really fun to start with. Like when you got to be, you still got to be smart about it, and plan your drifts, plan your approach to fish. They're a lot smarter. They're either a lot smarter or there's a lot less of them than what there was 15 or 20 years ago. Probably a combination of the two. So you do have to be clever about it, but it's a really, really fun way of fishing. That bite, when snapper are active and they're higher up in the water column, and your plastic hits the surface and that slack braid just rips off, is really, really
Yeah.
special.
Yeah.
And you just have your conversion rate of big fish, especially if you practice a few little tricks when hooking bigger ones in shallow country. Your conversion rate turns from 1 or 2 out of 10 to 8 or 9 out of 10. If I get badly done these days, I'm pretty upset about it for a while, because the expectation is that doesn't happen. So, but yeah, back when it first started, and for years, and I reckon 10 years, jig heads were the biggest problem.
Yep.
The snapper would just destroy them. So you were doing all this work to catch or hook quality fish, and you really had to get lucky. Nowadays, I was lucky enough and have been so fortunate to be able to, if the diver boys ask, what do we need to do here? Their 7.0 hook in their jig head range is, we had a lot of input into building that. It's like, you cannot be able to bend it, because a snapper will just crush it or snap it or
Yep.
destroy it. And there's no point in even using it. Like, what's the point of fishing if your terminal gear can't stand up to the test?
Yeah, exactly. That's those two things that I'll mention that really hard back into the last weekend, that where I finally caught a 70 plus snapper. I've been targeting them on plastics over the last, I guess, 2 years. I would say 2.5 years, where I've really started to hone in and spend, like you say, time on the water and doing all that sort of stuff. But the sound that makes when the braid takes off, like for example, that 70 centimeter, I had put the rod in the rod holder to go grab a drink of water while it was sinking for 5 or 10 seconds, and all I heard was the braid just taking off along the swell, and I was like, oh god, here we go, bang, and set the hook. And then the second part to that was, the jig head only just barely got through the top part of its mouth. It's got those bigger fish, their mouth is so thick and so hard to set that hook into. Like you're saying, you need to be able to have really, really good terminal tackle that you can trust and be able to actually pin that hook perfectly in the jaw of the fish.
Oh, you do. And I remember, and even something I've learned in the last couple of years and started doing is hitting them really hard on that hook set, that first bite. is whack them as hard as you can, and you'll change where the hook's positioned. It will hook them there 9 times out of 10. It'll come out of the corner of the jaw, and the barb on your hook will hang off that jaw hinge, and they're not coming off. And, I spoke to the King brothers at the Trophyana comp last year, and they were like, we don't believe you use loop knots. You can't do that. We keep snapping our leader. And I was like, well, that's your leader's fault. You have to change it.
Yep.
Because I do use loop knots because I've had my heart broken so many times by snapper chewing on the jig head and chewing through your leader. And I mentioned the first outfit, that TSS4 and the live fire, but now it's like high composite. What do they call it?
High modulus graphite.
Yeah, high modulus graphite blanks. The new Saltiga casting range are incredible rods. The Commanders, the Battlers. That we're not talking. Don't get me wrong, I loved live fibers and still do, but they're a different beast altogether now. The technology at our fingertips, the braid's stronger, thinner, your leader is clearer, super strong. You've got everything. There's no excuse now to not be able to find something that meets your needs and what you demand of it. Like if I set a hook on I did it with Mike in Sydney, of all places, off Long Reef, set a hook on a snapper and split the leader at the time, and just went, I can't use that ever again. It's gone.
It's crazy.
Being really particular about all of your equipment, and it comes back to that preparation piece I spoke to before. If you're going to go to the effort and invest the money, and it is the most expensive sport in the world, you combine boats and all your fishing gear and everything. I can't say it out loud.
Yeah.
If you're going to go to all that effort, you may as well make sure that the little things are right as well. And being really particular about your equipment is critical, especially with snapper. They'll punish your gear.
Yep. I'm certainly learning that. Not a good knot is free. It doesn't cost you money to be able to tie a really, really good knot. And, spending that little bit extra on some good gear is definitely something worthwhile. And I guess moving on to that sort of stuff, definitely different types of brands and soft plastics and stuff like that you would use to target snapper. Have you got like a favorite color, favorite style, all that sort of stuff?
And I used to use... well, as I touched on before, the squidgy range were the first plastics that we could really use, and it's evolved significantly from then. I did use gulps for quite a while, and they work effectively. But in recent years, and it's no secret, I do am really lucky to be on the Daiwa team, and I do use the Bait Junkies pretty well exclusively. Mike joined the team probably 12 months ago, and we did the one of the Daiwa Certate videos, the 24 Certate video for the Yokohama Tackle Show in Japan. And Mike rang me beforehand and said, are you taking the piss? Do these plastics actually work? And I said, yeah, mate, they do. And he said, righto. And, after that session, we'd made the video in a day, caught somewhere 15 to 18 reds. 4 of them were mid to high 80s. Like we'd had a day. And yeah, the best, the first time I ever used them, and I was the same, and I feel like sometimes we're creatures of habit as human beings, and I was fishing them with Braden Shoots from Daiwa, and he brought out the baby bass colour, and I was like, that's going to catch. And he caught his PB snapper on that colour on that day, and but now Hardy Head is a really, really good colour. Baby bass is still a great colour. Pearl white is a staple, and don't know why, but snapper really do love pearl white. There's an orange colour called Magma, which is probably similar to the Z-Man Coral Trout, and there's a Berkeley Gulp Fire Tiger.
Hmm.
Ugliest colours you've ever seen, but
Yeah.
they get eaten. Yeah, mate, they're my go-tos these days. The new 5.5-inch prawn is pretty deadly too on mulloway and snapper. You don't have to do a lot with it, and it swims quite nicely, and it definitely catches.
Yeah, exactly. Baby bass is my favourite for the bait junkies. In Sydney, I use the 5 inches because a 7 inch at times, I guess it makes it a bit too quiet. We're not getting that, trophy 80+ size as often as I guess people outside of Sydney. And that's from my experience. It could be completely different to some other guys, but baby bass is my favourite. But they're as rare as hen's teeth down here. As soon as they get in the tackle shops, they leave the stores quicker than they can get them back on the shelves. So you've got to get lucky and get there at the right time to be able to do that.
Yeah, right. That's really interesting because, Mickey Fuller, a lad who came second in the trophy hunter comp with his young fella and Joey, he's been I've been trying to. I've said, mate, you got to get onto these bait junkies, baby bass. And he said in the comp, he's swimming other lures and he couldn't get a bite. He put the bait junkies on. He got that second biggest fish, and his young fellow, they had a double hook up on proper trophy reds, and unfortunately Jack's pulled the hook on his, which is still heartbreaking.
Yeah, exactly. I guess we've talked a lot about the gear, but let's talk about, I guess, the locations in regards to catching snapper. Is there any key signs that you look at when you're targeting snapper?
They're pretty. They're creatures of habit, definitely. I mean, you look at the tagging data, and most snapper are caught very close to where they were released. And we're talking about a couple of 100 meters usually. So you can, wherever you find bait, wherever you've got decent structure, you can pretty comfortably confirm or predict where the snapper are going to be. It's then about planning your drift, approaching them in a really, I feel, stealthily sort of manner, and having the right coloured plastic on at the time to trigger a bite. And we're so lucky off here that you have so many options. You've got hundreds of reefs, reef edges, gravel beds, kelp beds within a few K radius of the harbour that you can, and every single one of them will hold snapper on their day. For me, it's probably refining your search sometimes based on water temperature and where what water temperature will trigger spawning activity, and it's usually around 18 degrees, and where the fish will hold to spawn. If you figure that out, you'll go a long way to catching consistently big reds. But here, it's just going and time on the water. You'll find them. You look at the crews that came up from Sydney for the trophy hunter comp, and all of them caught fish. It's because that you can do that here. Mackerel season, for example, 99% of the boats that come out of the harbour get mackerel fever and always want to chase mackerel, but the snapper are right there. You turn your mind away from mackerel, and the snapper are feeding on, I feel, the bait fish scraps that the mackerel will chew to pieces and fall below them.
Yeah, exactly right. I love that idea of being able to be stealthy and quiet. You've got a spot right here. You have to be able to drive right around it and give it a really wide berth, and then plan your drift out. Often I'll move hundreds of meters away from my spot and see what my drift line will look like over that, that spot that I want to fish over, and then line my boat up accordingly to it. I'm not sure if that's something you do as well, but that's something that's definitely increased my catch 100%, especially early morning, late afternoon, where the sound can reverberate even more because there's less noise on the water. And I guess even moving on into that, we're looking at water depth as well. Like what does water depth play in regards to catching snapper? Can you catch them in 2 meters of water? And I've heard of obviously snapper in 120 meters of water. So there are varying fish that go from all different types of depths.
Yeah, it's that's a passion piece of mine. Like at that talk night last week, it was, can you talk about deep water snapper? I said no, because I don't
Yeah.
fish for them deep water.
Yep, I'm the same.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. There's certainly Andrew Talbot came up from Sydney when he was living down there and fished with us in the Irvine years ago, and he won. He caught the biggest snapper for the tournament that year at about 92 centimetres. It was a beautiful big female fish, and that came out of 55 metres. It's about as deep as I've ever deliberately fished for snapper. Their range is diverse. I've heard of lads dropping for blue eye and barcode out in several hundreds of metres and still catching snapper. Not that often, but still getting them.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Recently, we've found a lot of snapper right in close. So quite a few fish that we caught in the competition on the weekend were off one of the headlands, literally nearly casting into the wash. So, I guess, that 90-odd centimetre fish that the official splasher caught with me a couple of weeks ago was in 6 or 7 metres.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just a different challenge, right? Like, it's the deep water boys still get done up every now and then, but there's an art to their craft that would not say I'm an expert in by any means, but nothing beats the shallow water fishing, I think, and anything to 30 metres is what I would consider shallow. Once you start getting over 30, you're in a different, you need a different size jig head, whereas a 3/8, quarter, sixth will get you out of trouble from 30 metres and below. And that's just where you get the best bites. That bite where that braid cuts through the water, like you touched on before, and then you wallop him. And there's a bit goes on when you're in proper shallow water and you're losing line at a rate of knots. It hasn't happened for ages, but last year in the lead up for this comp, I got properly drilled in 6 metres, and as soon as I hooked the fish, the rod's flatlined. I was like, this is... And we just had too much going on to do what I wanted to do to get after the fish, and just sort of stood there and went, well, he's got to make a mistake now, and he didn't, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's that mayhem at the start of that first bite, isn't it? Like I've sort of noticed, I guess, over the last year where I've started consistently catching what I would call decent fish. You probably, like you said before, would call small fish. That bite and that first run is just phenomenal. Like I probably would have dropped 3 or 4 fish that would easily be that 70 centimeter before I actually landed that one, because I had learnt my lesson over time. I panicked in the first couple and I was like, oh my God, this is a huge fish. I need to get it out straight away. And I've panicked, pulling hooks, blah, 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 breaking knots and, doing all those sorts of mistakes. But yeah, it's just such a cool bite and a fight from them. Moving on to, I guess, a bit more of the weather conditions. Like for me, I have a 4.6 meter Tilsty open boat. So conditions for me almost play the biggest role in targeting them. I can't go out on days where, it's above a 1.4 meter swell in 8 seconds and stuff like that, which is just too dangerous for me. But I guess let's have a look at a couple of things I wanted to ask was around, and every angle will ask this, moon phases, our tides, and the current are I guess the 3 things that I look at. I'm not sure about you, but yeah, I guess let's have a look at what we're looking at for weather.
Sure. I'd touch on the boat first. I went in a local lad, Justin Ward's 520 Sea Devil, I reckon it'd be nearly 10 years ago now, and I had a cruise craft reef raider at the time, and very capable boat. We'd rebuild it and blah, blah, blah. But, when it got tough, it was tough on you. If the seas were average, you really got knocked around. And I went in this Sea Devil and I was like, oh my God.
Yep.
What is this thing?
Yep.
I literally put the cruise craft on the market, sold it, and ordered one. And I got the center console 520 just because I wanted to be able to go cod fishing, barra fishing, and
Yep.
yeah, we caught everything from metre 17 barra, metre 14 cod out of Copeton, 60 plus kilo yellowfin offshore. So it really was a beautiful little boat. And now I've got the 620 for all my offshore stuff and a little tinny for the barras and bass and what have you. Very lucky in that regard. And this, for me, the Devils can just do anything in any conditions, just about. So you sort of need that capability and versatility. In terms of weather conditions when chasing fish, definitely your tide changes. Like tide changes are trigger points for bites. Moon phase is really important, especially for snapper. Just when like the backside of the full, when the moon's up in the day, is very, very hard. And I'm not exactly sure why. Perhaps I really don't know, actually, but it's just very, very hard, that backside of the full. The lead up to the full is perfect, but that's when you will have a lot of moon in the night time and not a lot, virtually zero in the day. So if we were to say the competition on Saturday, you had a tide change at around 8:50 and one at about 2 p.m. I had a plan for where I wanted to be for those tide changes. Something that some people focus on it and some don't, but if you're about to have a significant weather event, like let's say on a Saturday morning, you're looking to go for a fish and a proper southerly was going to turn up at 8 or 10 in the morning, it's worth getting out just before it.
This is exactly when I caught my 70. It was exactly that.
Because fish know when this weather's going to go to rubbish, and it must get harder for them to feed, and they'll feed up prior to it. I mean, one of the best topwater mackerel sessions I've ever had was just before a genuine weather event, and they bit so amazing. It was ridiculous. But that lad in that 520 Wardy, he caught his PB snapper just before a weather event, and I remember talking to him the night before. I was like, mate, they'll bite, we've got to go. And he goes, yeah, but it's happening at 7 in the morning. So it doesn't matter, we'll just poke out the front for 2 hours. And he caught a 93, and we got a couple of other good fish that morning as well. So that's just a little anomaly in the weather like that. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I definitely agree. I woke up in the morning at 5 and saw the rain radar, and there was rain within the radar, and I was like, oh, by the time I get out there, by the time I have a fish, get everything set up, I was like, nah, go, just do it. And I only would have had 2 casts out there, and one of the 2 casts was, again, that 70 centimeter fish. Like, it was just insanely good how those weather events can just change so much stuff. And looking at some other tips, how do you adjust your tactics when snapper are being finicky or actually not even biting?
I would say downgrade your gear, but I don't.
I always say I do, but I never do as well. I'm like, oh no, it's this is what works. This is tried and true, tested for me. It's my comfort zone and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I know lads who fished in the comp and said they couldn't get a bite until they dropped a 12-pound. That's
crazy.
I can't do that.
No, that's too much anxiety right there.
Yeah, I went down a 15-pound braid once and caught fish, but no more than what I did with 30-30, and that's what I usually run. A lot of the lads from Sydney, when they were first coming up, would sort of scoff at 30-30, and I was like, well, you'll figure it out yourself.
Yeah.
I will, when it's tough, you just persist and keep going from spot to spot to spot until you find them that are hungry. I won't go down in line class. I won't try and meet them at what they want in terms of their finicky behaviour. I'll just go,
No, you bite this.
this is, you will eventually, and I know you. And when you do, I'm not gonna, because the second you do that, that proper fish is going to come along, and you just don't have what I think is a fighting chance. I put a lot of pressure on all my gear and on the fish equally, and we'll try and extract them. If I can't do that, and let's say you do, and you've gone to 20 pound or 12 pound, then they just chew through your leader.
Yeah,
anyway.
exactly.
It's yeah, the long, really, you've just got to, you will find a hungry fish. You just got to put in the effort.
Yeah, it's the hours. I almost prefer when it's tough, because I feel like I learn more when it's tough versus when you go out there and it's just fish after fish, and it's that's what you want when you go out fishing. Obviously, you want to have sessions where it's just so easy to catch them, but it's those tougher days that make those really rewarding days so much more enjoyable.
Absolutely, and there's snapper fishing. Yeah, that day Mike and I had for the Surtate video is as good as it gets these days, I think, and would be as good as it gets in any measure. But they're not very. That doesn't happen very often anymore. The competition results from the weekend, it was super tough fishing. I think there wouldn't have been a lot between the top 30 crews. There's a couple of quality fish here and there, but no one really stood above the rest and won it by hundreds or thousands of points, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
When the fishing is tough, that's when you've got to just bunker down and do what do what works best. I'm not to say that you shouldn't try new things, but what has worked for you consistently in the past when it's really hard is the time to really grind that out and fish with your favorite color, your favorite setup, and get everything right, and just believe it's going to work. If you've got doubt in your mind, it's another possible superstition, or as I sort of think,
yep.
If you're feeling it, then you'll catch. If you're not feeling it, that could be the spot you're in, the outfit you've got in the hand, the color plastic you've got on. You've got to believe, and if you believe in what you're doing, then it works. I was fishing with the ladder fish with a lot lately, Paulie Ray, and a really lovely lad generally, but great lad to fish with. I said, I'm just feeling it about this watermelon colour at the moment. He said, that's shit. I said, no, I reckon it's going to catch. Next cast, bang. And it's just that mindset thing, it's
exactly.
Whether it's positivity, because everything's connected. You're connected to your gear. Your energy might be flowing down the line, and what the fish. We can't even understand what fish can feel.
Yeah, exactly.
They've got a set of eyes, but they've got a much more complicated sensory system than people can understand. I mean, you think of the lateral line down a fish and how fish can migrate across the sea without a GPS, or it's, there's a whole other realm to this sport that is virtually not understood at all or misunderstood. So there's something to, if you really bunker down, go back to what you really know and be confident in what you're doing, one of them will jump on.
Yeah, exactly. I always say, my idea is trust your gut. Like if you like you're saying, if you cast out that lure and you're not confident in it, what's the point of casting it at all? You want to be able to cast every time with that lure, bait, whatever you're using when you're fishing, with the utmost confidence. And it's just amazing how a session where you 4 hours without a bite and you're like, oh my God, what am I doing? Go back to your trusted location, get your favorite lure on, your favorite rod and reel, and then all of a sudden the session turns around, just because, again, that confidence, like you're saying, just having that confidence in yourself, and it plays a part. I think it might be superstition, but I also think it would play a part. I guess talking about snapper on soft plastics, what's the most memorable catch of a snapper on soft plastics? Like, if you were to give me your number one catch you've ever had with them?
Yeah, and this is a heart wrencher too. So my younger brother took his own life maybe 8 years ago, and when that happened, I thought I couldn't live again. You know, I'd lost my spark, couldn't smile, couldn't do anything good, and I reckon it was 2 weeks after he passed, I went for a fish and was 2 minutes from the harbour and caught that 96 centimetre knobby on a plastic, and I swear it was him. So that is the most memorable catch. And, you know, the bite, the fight, everything was just amazing. And the way that you imagined a snapper fight being, and when he came up into the net to see, his nose was 6 centimetres long. And, you know, the steep, his forehead was so steep, there was almost a concave in above his eye to that big knob. There's been a lot of like I said before, I think I've been so lucky to catch a few big ones. That's the best one and the most memorable catch. And there's, you know, a mental health message in there for everyone out there
Exactly.
who's listening. But, you know, that fish was truly special, and each one of the 90s is really special in its own way. You don't come across them that often, and to be lucky enough to put them in the net, you know, I guess the next best was 3 fish in 3 casts in a
Wow.
comp. Went 93, 89, 93.
Hang on, did you release the first 93?
Yeah.
Is there a hook mark in the corner of the jaw?
Funnily enough, like, the guys in the comp didn't believe us. I was like, mate, there's the photos. One's a big female.
Yeah.
The next one was a female 89. Then the next one was this big, beautiful, knobby male.
Yeah.
Um,
That's so cool.
And they went, oh, well, I guess we've got to believe you. I was like, what do you mean you got to believe me? There's the pictures
Proof right there.
with the times attached to it. But, you know, that's as good as it. That's truly as good as it gets. Those big fish. And Mike still beat me that weekend. I still can't believe it.
You're still stinging to this day.
Oh, 100%.
Well, I guess firstly, thank you for coming on the podcast, being the first episode. I don't know if you know that, but you are the first guest on the podcast. And I think what a way to start it off. If anyone doesn't know who Sam Gilchrist is, he's By the Gills on all different social media platforms. Is there any other things you would like to plug? I know you're a sponsored angler. Throw your sponsors out there for me.
Mate, the lads at Daiwa are super supportive of what I do and how I do it, and I'd like to think, you know, give back to them. Equally, the team at Jetty Boating in Coffs Harbour, the best local boat shop around. I mean, they keep us on the water and are incredibly helpful. And I know they threw a boat and trailer package at the competition on the weekend, which is so generous of them in the climate that we're operating in. Simrad Electronics. I remember the first time Mike beat me in Irvine, I was like, you know, I've got to understand what this guy does differently, and his electronics package was one of those things. It's probably about it, mate. Yamaha, by far. You know, I was talking to Mickey about his engine on the weekend. I said, mate, just got to get a Yami and you won't have any problems.
Yep, I've got an old Yami. I think mine's a 2005 Yami, and I would have had it when it had 300 hours on it. I reckon in 3 years I've put nearly 2,000 hours on it, and it hasn't missed a beat.
Mate, on the tinny downstairs, it's in the garage. There's a probably 1980 model Yami 2-stroke that every second pull it'll go. But, you know, I've been through a lot of engines over the years, and blew up an E-Tech, had issues with others, but, you know, the Yamis I've used have never skipped a beat. Yeah, that's I'm not one to carry on about brands, but they really do support what we do, and they don't pay me a cent. You know, we support each other in terms of product use and genuine feedback. And
Yep, exactly.
very lucky to be in the product development space with the Dyer boys. You pinch myself sometimes. It's so lucky to be able to have that sort of input into a sport that I love.
Exactly. The Dyer boys have been very nice to me as well, reposting, resharing things on social media. So I've got nothing but positivity towards the Dyer family. I love the gear they use. I use it personally. Not sponsored by them, but I use their gear, use their bait junkies, rods, reels, line, tackle, all of it. And yeah, I feel like they're always up for feedback, and they're always there to be wanting to post, people like myself trying to get into the fishing space and the content creation space. So
they're really trying to tailor or meet the angler's needs in Australia, like really get into the saltwater sports fishing market and design products that are built for purpose. And I think they're doing a great job. I mean, there's still...
I certainly think so. Like from a outsider, I guess an outsider perspective, I was with another company for a while there, and I would use it religiously for years and years. And then I chose Daiwa because a lot of the products that they were showcasing and a lot of the gear that they were showcasing, I felt like were to suit my needs, whereas other companies were just promoting their products because they thought it was the best product. And like I said, that the ability for them to understand what the angler needs at this very current point in time, they're second to none for that.
Yeah, it's a bit. It's that they're wanting to move away from a generic product line and actually have built for purpose equipment, which when you expect the best from your gear, you can get it.
Exactly right. Well, thank you, Sam Gilchrist, for coming on the podcast, and we'll chat to you very, very soon.
Thanks, Aaron. Really appreciate it, mate, and hope everyone enjoyed the listen.